Now let's talk about vegetated waterways, which include grassed waterways and vegetated ditches. A vegetated waterway is a natural or constructed channel with permanent vegetation that is shaped and graded to carry surface water at a non-erosive velocity to a property drainage outlet. Vegetation in the ditch protects the soil from erosion and traps sediment, pesticides, nutrients, and potentially pathogenic microorganisms being transported in agricultural runoff. It's common to see an existing drainage ditch on a farm that is converted to a vegetated ditch. A majority of grass waterways, on the other hand, are natural channels. The pollution reduction mechanisms are the same for both vegetated ditches and grassed waterways, and the factors affecting their effectiveness are similar. Vegetated ditches or grassed waterways may be suitable on sites where concentrated runoff needs to be conveyed and controlled without causing erosion. Vegetated waterways should be considered for implementation on relatively flat sites just before drainage leaves a property and enters a public waterway. Let's talk about the advantages of vegetated waterways. To begin with, these structures help slow the flow of water to a non-erosive level. Secondly, they provide a means of trapping sediment, nutrients, and pesticides while preventing gully erosion during smaller runoff events. Third, they reduce sediment loads in irrigation tailwater by 30 to 100% and also reduce pesticide loads in irrigation tailwater by 25 to 100%. Fourth, they can provide habitat and cover for wildlife. Fifth, the vegetation in a ditch can absorb pesticides during runoff events. Lastly, the root systems of vegetation support soil microorganisms, which degrade pesticides and denitrify nitrate in the shallow soil profile. There are some limitations to vegetated ditches or grassed waterways. First, storm flows can be restricted by overgrown channels, causing waterway breaching and flooding. So managing the vegetation in a channel is important. Ideally, you have a proper balance between too much and not enough vegetation in the channel. Second, if there is a large runoff event, the concentrated flow can limit the amount of sediment trapping and water infiltration. There are a few key factors to consider when installing and maintaining a vegetated waterway. When building a ditch, consider the cross-sectional shape, depth, length, and slope of the ditch. A flat bottom or U-shape is more effective than a V-shaped cross-section. A general rule for size is that the total surface area of the vegetated ditch should be approximately 1% of the total drainage area. For instance, if a field is 50 acres, the aggregate size of a vegetated ditch should be at least 1/2 acre. The slope down the length of the ditch should not exceed 6%. Generally, slope should be between 2 and 4%. The optimum length of a vegetated ditch depends on the targeted pollutants and should be considered together with other design factors such as ditch shape and side slope. The longer the runoff remains in the ditch, the more chemicals and sediment can be removed. Undersized vegetated waterways have little to no positive impact on water quality. As for the width of the bottom, the wider the better. A wider design maximizes flow residence time and promotes pollutant removal by settling, filtration, and some absorption and uptake of dissolved pollutants by vegetation roots. A 2-foot bottom width enables use of a standard lawnmower to facilitate swale mowing. When vegetation is planted in a ditch, species selection is important. Select vegetation that is well suited to survive in the site conditions and that may provide wildlife habitat. Ideally, use perennial grasses that are long-lived, deep-rooted, stiff-stemmed, and low-growing, no taller than 6 inches. The grasses can increase soil porosity and decrease soil bulk density, improving infiltration characteristics. Your local NRCS office can advise you on species ideal for your area. Extensive root growth and healthy perennial vegetation increases biological activity by supplying an organic carbon energy source to soil microorganisms. The microorganisms are responsible for degrading pesticides and denitrifying nitrate. Also well suited for vegetated ditches are native hydrophilic plants that can tolerate periods of drought, such as certain sedge and rush species. If high flows are expected before the vegetation is established, consider installing an erosion control blanket, netting, or mesh to stabilize sediment in the ditch until the vegetation is well established. During normal operation, depth of the runoff should not exceed the height of the grass. Ongoing maintenance includes mowing or cutting the vegetation at least annually, more frequently depending on the vegetation vigor. Also remove excess sediment and repair or replant areas damaged by equipment, herbicides, or erosion to maintain the function of the vegetated ditch. Once established, a vegetated ditch or waterway can provide an efficient technique for minimizing the impact of drainage flowing from irrigated fields.